Good evening. My name is Jonathan Skinner. This is a taster pre-content introduction to the research methods in anthropology. And in it, I would like to do three things. This is me swimming in Lake Bled, trying to keep my head above water. And this is perhaps emblematic of research methods, how you research a topic and how you engage with data collection and think through and rationalize your research project without thinking. So there are three objectives. One is to give you a sense of a distinction between research methods and research methodology. Second thing is to introduce you to the theory of research methods, to the theoretical meta level of research methods as an introduction and as an opener. And thirdly, to propose a mixed methods approach in anthropological research. And that's something that you will hopefully get a sense of running through the double semester module research methods in anthropology, where we give you the full complement the toolkit of research methods. We hopefully equip you with the skills with which you can go ahead and undertake a research dissertation in biological anthropology, in social anthropology, or in mixed methods, so that we will be giving you a sense of quantitative research methods with the first section on statistical data gathering, inferences, deduction, regression, causation, and the second half of the full wider double semester module, where we look more at the qualitative, from interview methods to focus groups to the nature of ethnography in anthropology. So let me turn to the first learning objective, and that is the distinction between research methods and methodology. So a method is distinguished from a methodology. Methodology is the wider overview on the research methods. So methodology is the wider body of practices, the collection of procedures, the rules that are used by those who work in a discipline such as anthropology to engage in a particular research inquiry. So you might say that methodology is a set of working methods. Methodology is the umbrella. It's systematic. It has a structured, regular approach. It has a theoretical framework within which the various methods fit when they're being applied to your field of study. So the difference between methodology and method is that methodology is the collection, the ology, the study of the methods, and the method is the individual method, the procedure, the technique, the manner in which you are conducting your research. So for many social anthropologists, myself included, a focus group or a semi-structured interview would be a research method within a wider collection of methodologies. So in this introduction, we're looking at methodology to then go into research methods per se, to give you week by week different research methods as tasters. So methodology then is the study or the theoretical analysis of these working methods. We should also distinguish between methodology and being methodical. Methodical, the adjective, meaning to be orderly or systematic in your particular approach. So methodology is about the principles that underpin or underlie the deployment of those particular research methods. Think of it in a meta level or an umbrella. Within that umbrella or within that toolkit are the distinct particular methods. Let me then give you a loose, general introduction to methodology to give you a sense of the way in which methods are individual composed methods are distinguished from one another. And in doing this, I took the decision to be quite comprehensive and quite loose in my overview, rather than try and be comprehensive, which could be a module in itself. So the purpose behind this word cloud is to give you a sense of the various topics, the various writers that touch on methodology in social sciences, but also the natural sciences. So we're running from fieldwork, sociology, anthropology, the nature of the discipline, Malinowski, Paul Feyerabend, Keith Hart, Karl Popper, Emil Durkheim, the nature of science, and then even the decolonization of science. We might say that fieldwork is one of the hallmarks of anthropology, in particular social anthropology. Also, some sociologists undertake fieldwork, and that this is, for example, a qualitative technique of data gathering and eventual analysis and interpretation, as opposed to the more scientific, experimental, quantitative approach. Now, in saying that, I've already started to stereotype and divide between the two cultures, as C.P. Snow in the 50s wrote about the distinction and the divisions between the sciences and the arts. Perhaps a false division, that there is such a distinction between the qualitative and the quantitative, between the natural and the artificial, between a more empirical approach to the natural sciences versus a more interpretive sort of look at people's behavior and their understandings of society that generalizes from particular instances. One is looking for laws in the natural sciences. The other is looking for trends and patterns, local points of view and understandings. And yet both the scientist and the artist, both the person working in the quantitative sort of side of research methods and those working in the qualitative divide, are engaged with similar activities and practices. And hence we might say then that both approaches to understanding are generating new forms of knowledge. And there's a similarity then in the enterprise with which we conduct research, whether the scientist, the artist, the social scientist. We are all trying to look for new understandings. We're using different languages and different techniques, but our mission, shall we say, our enterprise is similar. Some other points I would like to make about these various writers and writings on methodology, on, for example, Karl Popper with his approach to science as a technique that relies upon the principle of falsification. You move forward in your Thomas Kuhn-like paradigm by falsifying hypotheses rather than confirming things. It's through falsification that you generate new hypotheses until they are increasingly falsified. So what I'm trying to suggest here as a way of looking at this module on research methods is that we can have an applied mixed methodology. in looking at the qualitative and the quantitative, and that there are advantages and disadvantages of both types of approaches, of particular methods. And it's important, therefore, to understand and to try and account for the strengths and the weaknesses of your research approach, the shortcomings that perhaps are necessitated by the particular techniques which you use. So for example, quantitative methods are very strong at giving you sampling, surveys, statistical overviews in analyzing large amounts of data, but less strong on interpretation, less strong on understanding that you might get from an interview or a focus group or even a textual analysis. The important thing is that the method fits with the nature of the inquiry, and that you're able to articulate that relationship of why you chose your particular research method to answer the questions that you're posing. We can therefore hopefully familiarize yourself with this range or toolbox of methodologies running through the 2 semesters to help you practice some of those techniques in a safe environment, and to hone then your own project ideas, and crucially turn you into dissertation researchers yourselves. So by the end of the 2nd semester, you will have an understanding of research methods that will be appropriate to the dissertation that you want to investigate. You'll also have some insight into how other researchers undertook their own research. You'll become nuanced readers into their data. You'll understand how they produced their material. You'll be able to critique it and look at the implications for the researcher's choices. Is it valid? Is it applicable? Does it make sense? Can they justify their approaches? I mentioned several names here. Paul Feyerabend was an anarchist methodologist who was against the idea that we should have research methods. Bronislaw Malinowski suggested the long-term participant observation, the deep attempt to gain the native point of view, to use a politically incorrect expression. Mentioned Karl Popper, Emil Durkheim, the sociologist who wanted to align the social sciences on a par with the natural sciences in giving them a sociological method to look at social facts on a par with natural facts, as though we can draw an equivalence, and perhaps suggesting that social facts are out there and just as objective. What I would like to add is that these writers are writing at a meta level, on a meta commentary on research methods. Nigel Rapport has written about science as being a moral endeavor, one that aligns itself with the work of Karl Popper in attempting to establish an open society. Karl Popper was trying to connect science with society. The former, science, is a self-calibrating enterprise that is open and rational. It's a form of practice that is predictable, that informs and influences society, and that is also in itself informed and influenced by society. So therefore we can draw a query into the nature of objectivity. In this way, then, I'm perhaps downplaying the traditional schism between science as rational practice and religion as, for example, a moral practice. the one dealing with how things are, and the other with how people ought to behave. We can say that science rationalizes and gives us a rule or rules of reason, whereas religion indoctrinates, gives us a creed of beliefs. I've tried to write about this in engaging with the British Festival of Science. Both are perhaps grown out of largely Western Judeo-Christian social and cultural milieu. And so there have been attempts to decolonize science, just as we have become a more secular society, to breach the hold that religion has on our social fabric and our understandings or attempts. We're no longer trying to look for establishing ourselves as the Victorians did, that we were on a civilizing mission for soldiers of Christ, as a sort of an attempt to put the Victorians at the pinnacle of evolution and social development. Notions of science and society have emerged from this legacy of the European Enlightenment, to coin an expression, in attempts to be humanistic, liberal, plural, republican, perhaps in a Trumpian world, and also perhaps existential. Science, we might say, attempts an acultural and ahistorical way of establishing, of making grand claims. One of the distinctive characteristics of science is, as I mentioned, the self-calibrating ability to assess, to test, to try and falsify, to correct itself. In science, there are, however, standards of morality and openness in its Popperian practice. And there are standards of good practice which are within our human rights. So we can have an open and moral science. Science is not necessarily neutral. But we need to be careful that science, in its attempt for this open and moral society, one which acquires and accumulates and advances its archives of knowledge and good practices, just as Ernest Gellner, the anthropologist, proposed for science, a supracultural, a form of cognition beyond the culture, that it doesn't foster a multicultural form of colonialism, a way in which community traditions might be accommodated within civil society. To some extent, science is an attempt through a variety of means to explore and harness knowledge of the natural world. This is a notion of science that is inclusive, in that it incorporates indigenous sciences as well as Western science, if such groupings can be sustained. And there are decolonizing writers, decolonizing methods, such as Linda Tahani, who wants to suggest that there are these biases. And that rests on earlier anthropological work, such as Robin Horton, who suggested that African traditional thought and Western science have equivalences, that effect and affect are similar knowledge forms. So we have scientific conversations that all start with forms of conjecture, that are underpinned by cultural assumptions, that have speculation and anticipation built into them and into the world in which we live. They then move on to attend to the results of these speculations, carrying a thesis until it has been disproved. According to Popper's principle of falsification, we can only disprove and not prove, as though this is a natural and universal mode of inquiry. Conjecture, refutation, conjecture, refutation. So we might say that the physicist and the diviner, the magician, are both seeking to explain, to divine, to fathom the mushroom cloud in front of them. Conjecture, refutation. They both experiment with and within their worlds. Conjecture, refutation. Science then might be conceived of as a project that's open, inclusive, natural, and social. Science can be a notion, a permanent dialectic of conjecture and refutation. This notion of science as philosophical everyday practice offsets the criticism that science is a monolithic projection, a single entity, one lacking in plurality. Science stripped bare like a raw plug, Laura Nader's naked science, is a natural process, a habit of mind, universal and intuitive. Like poetry then, science is public practice with provenance, open, privileged, edifying, rhythmic, structured, and with narrative. Good science, like good couplets, gives on to good society, tolerant, understanding, and democratic. I want to conclude this taste of this introduction by referring to very briefly to Keith Hart, John Law, and Tim Ingold. Tim Ingold, in particular, professor of anthropology, retired professor of anthropology at Aberdeen, who has written some critiques on recent engagements with ethnography and how ethnography feeds into anthropology, the discipline. And there are several readings and YouTube clips to investigate, which will be the subject in particular of the first discussion in the module. Keith Hart suggests that anthropology is so built upon different approaches that it is a sort of anti-discipline in itself, that it doesn't have a distinct method, that it colonizes from other disciplines, from the natural sciences and the social sciences, from the sociologists to the statisticians to the physiologists. And you might get a feel of that through this module, Research Methods in Anthropology. John Law suggests that there's a messiness about research methods, that to some extent there's a sort of, you might say, a serendipity that links into Paul Feyerabend's anarchic approach to anthropology. I like this picture from Montserrat, where I was doing my postgraduate research, where you have the Western videographer filming a ceremonial opening of some buildings, and what he's seeing is blinkered, and you have outside of his field of view, or the camera's field of view, that sort of hard focus. You have a soft focus in the peripheral, and there's several Montserratians looking at what he's filming as well as the events. And it's a male Western gaze upon the Montserratian event. And it's interesting in that what he captures is very different to what is going on around him from my camera and my scribblings, jottings, and field notes. So we can critique and decolonize our research methods. We can look at them from a feminist perspective, as Janet Finch, University of Kiel, does in critiquing research methods as based upon a very male, domineering, aggressive, aggrandizing approach to generating data and knowledge that she equates to an assault upon the other, the native other, to go back to Bronislaw Malinowski's native point of view perspective. We have Linda Tihani with the post-colonial decolonizing of research methods. And I wanted to add the serendipity and anarchic approach to research methods, or critiquing of this form of sorcery, but also serendipity, to invoke Skorupski. Anarchic, according to Paul Feyerabend, full of serendipity, in that you are on Montserrat in the Caribbean, liming, hanging out waiting for things to happen, following them, chronicling them, narrating them, in textualizing them, and trying to piece from these particular events some general points about people's behavior and customs, morals, conventions, and culture. Out of that chance encounter, or what John Law would refer to as the mess, that firmament bubbling away in the sort of research endeavor, we're also pushing, proposing a mixed methods final point for you to try and make sense of your own dissertations, and how the methods might complement each other, that you might want to use a questionnaire alongside a focus group and an interview, that you might want to do some statistical sampling to investigate people's responses to a test that you're proposing, and trying to falsify a hypothesis that you're trying to falsify from a proper perspective. So in leaving you with these opening thoughts and ideas on research methods, before we go into the methods themselves, we have this overview on methodology. I have a final thought-provoking question that will perhaps kick off our first class on whether anthropology is both an anti-discipline and anti-method in its practices and in its ideals. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in our first class next week.